Good morning. Good morning. This is the day's first round table, and we are going to be talking about portraits and feminine power in the visual culture of the Baroque, the construction of the image of Maria Anna of Austria. So we are going to hear first the two presentations. They're not exactly conferences, I don't think. I'm not sure how to actually call them. And then, as we did yesterday, we will be devoting time to questions and answers. So you may pose your questions. I will receive the questions from the hall, from this auditorium, and I will be receiving also questions from abroad. I need to say thank you to our assistants who are with us, helping to take note of those questions coming in online. Thank you very much, because it is a difficult task. And thank you also to the interpreters. Professor Rodríguez is very kindly thanking us for our help. So I'm going to give the floor to Mercedes Llorente Molina, who is with Universidad Jaume I.
Ahora sí. Can you hear me? Yes. Good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Noelia García Pérez, for inviting us and to this wonderful Congress. And then I would also like to thank the Prado Museum and all of you who are attending this conference, be it physically present or online. Yesterday, Professor Silvia Mitchell, but also Álvaro Pascual Chenel, they both talked about Maria Anna of Austria. And today, during my talk, I'm going to focus on the Mother Queen, that is to say, Mary Ann at the end of her life, the Queen Mother. I'm going to start with the little presentation. Maria Ann of Austria was born in 1634, daughter of Ferdinand III and Infanta Maria from Spain. She was going to be marrying her cousin, Prince Baltasar Carlos, son of Philip IV, but when her cousin died, she married Philip IV. The new queen consort arrived in Madrid in 1649. She had 5 children, but only 2 reached adulthood. After the death of the king in 1675, actually in 1665, from 1665 to 1664, the Queen Mother became regent, tutor, and curator of the regent, the king boy. And on her behalf, she was the queen until Charles II got the adulthood. She left the government, Maria Anna, although she continued to play a key role until her death in the succession to the throne. As we said, in 1665, Charles II reached the age of 14, which was the adulthood. That same year, the queen ordered the preparation of the king's house, separating it definitely from her mother's house and moving to other parts of the Alcázar to the king's area. When Maria Anna left governmental functions, she also changed the way she was portrayed. It is interesting that she recovered models of Velázquez for Isabella of Bourbon in 1630 and the first Velázquez prototype of Maria Anna in 1652. Of the representation, which I call Queen Mother Consort, we have 4 portraits. The one in the Harrach collection, the one you're seeing right now, next to Charles II, the one in the Consistorische Museum in Vienna, in the Ambras Castle. In these portraits by Carreño, the queen appears standing, dressed as a widow, in the middle of a naked room. The chair and the table reappear in both paintings with the clock. Of the 2 previous models that may have influenced in the typology of the Queen Mother Consort created by Carreño, the portrait of the Empress Maria Widow, which is in the Descalzas Reales and was made by Juan Pantoja de la Cruz. The canvas from the Harrach collection was painted around 1677, when the king gave it to the count as a gift. together with the portrait of Charles II in a habit of a Knight of the Order of Toison. The German ambassador took two more portraits. The two portraits logically follow the same typologies than the two that have been given to him, with some differences. The one in the Vienna Museum and the one in the Harrach's collection, the Vienna collection, has a more pronounced spatial perspective and a more accentuated luminous effect in the background. There are two others that are less known. I have no image of them, although I have seen them. The great difference with these two other paintings of the Queen Mother is that the room where Doña Maria Anna is located opens onto a garden with a deep perspective that directs our view to a fountain. It takes up models of Velázquez himself and his workshop, such as the portraits of Philip IV and his first wife, Isabella of Bourbon, which are currently in Hampton Court Palace, or the one that you're seeing right now, which is at that same museum, of Queen Maria Anna when she was still Queen Consort. The dates for these paintings would have to range from the time when the king reaches the age of 14, 1675, to the time when the queen leaves the court in exile to Toledo in 1677. There are two more portraits of Maria Anna related to the same typology. The one in the Lázaro Galdiano Museum, which is a novel. We also have another portrait at the Museum of Versailles of the workshop of Carreño, and then another one which is smaller in the Museum of the Monastery of El Escorial. These paintings show the Queen Mother subordinate to her son. These are portraits for the European courts, where the beginning of the young king's government is marked. Specifically, they are sent as gifts to two courts, Paris and Vienna, with which Madrid had blood ties, but also serious political problems. The court gift, as we all know, plays a key role in the personal relationships. The next portrait that we're going to talk about is the one also created by Carreño, is the portrait of Miss Maria Anna of Austria from the Diocesan Museum of the Sacred Art in Vitoria. The face of the queen and the position, especially of the hand resting on the lap, is similar to the portrait of Ambras and also the oval of Lázaro Galdiano Museum, and two more that follow this model of the seated queen of the Museum of Vitoria that are in private collections, which makes us think that this was the portrait that served as a model for the rest. The date the museum gives us this portrait is 1671 to 1677. Another important fact to take into consideration is that the Queen herself leaves in March 1677 and returns to Madrid after the death of Juan José of Austria that was discussed yesterday in September 1679. For some experts, this portrait is the best of the many effigies of the Queen left by Carreño. In this new typology, the painter represents the Queen Maria Anna in the foreground, seated on a black background. There is a red curtain to her left. Maria Anna almost frontal turns slightly to the right. Her face reflects older age. Her right hand holds a fan and her left hand rests on her skirt. It was painted not naturally live. The type of portrait that Carreño painted is similar to two portraits that were then and now at the Descalzas Reales de Madrid and that the painter must have known. The portrait of Antonio Moro, painted of the Infanta Maria de Portugal from 1550 to 1552, and the one painted by Alonso Sanchez Coello of Juana de Portugal from 1566-1567, both seated in a chair and in the foreground, exactly like Maria Anna. The exile of the Queen is the... What has happened? Oh, I did it the other way around. I'm sorry. The exile of the Queen is the appropriate... my apologies for this picture, but I have no other, and I wanted you to see the typology. The exile of the Queen, as I was saying, is the appropriate moment for the emergence of a new typology where the Queen does not appear related not to power, nor to her son, nor to the court. It is then when possibly the two portraits of the seated Queen is made. A new object is added to these two portraits. Instead of a fan, the queen carries a book in her right hand, and with her index finger she marks the pages of what could be a breviary following the rules established by Trent. This prayer book is an element used in the portraits of religious, where continuous prayer is emphasized as a way of life. The prayer book is also used in the portraits of royal women, where the intention is to show the queen's religiosity, her virtue, her beliefs. Incidentally, yesterday, another one was mentioned by Elizabeth the Catholic with one in her hand, and Isabella of Portugal also. We saw them yesterday. This book also points out to another point that makes up the ideal of Habsburg women, piety. Piety gave Maria Anna a reputation of personal strength that she was able to use for her political objectives. After the marriage of Charles II with Mary Louise of Orleans, a series of public acts took place, amongst them Auto de Fe, that was celebrated on the 30th of June of 1680 in the Plaza Mayor of Madrid, in which the king and the new queen, together with the queen mother, were made visible. Francisco Ricci painted the same painting that bears the same name, Auto de Fe, in 1683 in order to decorate the Buen Retiro Palace, and it is currently in El Prado. This picture includes the first painting of Maria Anna when she came back from the exile. She came back with a public office dressed as a widow. She's sitting on a gray chair on top of a carpet under the dosel with the three royal persons. The arrival of Mary Louise of Orleans led to the exploration of new forms of representation of Marianne. Before I continue with these Claudio Coello paintings of Mariana, I'm going to talk about the relationship Mariana had with Claudio Coello and what the accounts tell. Claudio Coello was appointed painter to the king in 1683, when the position became vacant after the death of the incumbent Dionisio Mentuan, also on the recommendation of Carreño. When he died in 1685, he succeeded him as a painter of chamber, receiving the many benefits that the position entailed. The palace archives confirmed that Coelho was sworn as the king's chamber painter on 1685. Maria Anna had frequent dealings with him. According to Palomino, he executed two large paintings for the intercolumniations of the altarpiece of the Temple of Jerusalem, the circumcision and the adoration of the kings. Later studies by Professor Ángel Apterido showed that they were made for the churches of Bethlehem and the new altarpiece. In Mariana's accountancy, there are annotations that show that she made several payments. In 1687, for instance, it is said that 1,500 reales de Bellón were paid, or 51,000 maravedíes, as a contribution to the expenses. Or in another document in 1687, it is stated that the queen has decreed the payment of 25 doubloons to Claudio Coello, chamber painter of my dear and beloved son. Claudio Coello was forced to ask for more help in 1688. He pointed out that he had served and still was the chamber painter with no other reward than the benefits of his work and the contributions to his expenses, so he was not paid. He stated that he had many obligations to his children and family, and he was very short of resources, and he begged His Excellency to order that he be given what was customary for other patrons so that he could continue to serve His Majesty with the same fervor. From 1691 until Coello's death in 1693, Maria Anna provided financial support after Coello's death. Payments continued to his widow. There are also records of payments for works commissioned by the Queen Mother, including paintings for her chambers and several portraits, two of which we know were made of Charles II and the wife. The relationship between the Queen Mother and the painter is documented, although we have not been able to find any specific reference to the painter's portraits, which we will now discuss. In 1685, Claudio Coello painted the portrait that today is kept in the Bowes Museum, where he portrays Maria Anna as the Queen Mother of the Catholic monarchy. According to Palomino, Claudio Cuello portrayed the Queen Mother, Our Lady, Doña Maria of Austria, with great mastery. The only signed painting of Maria Anna by Coello is the Alt Pinakothek in Munich. There's some similitudes with the Munich's portrait that we're going to see afterwards. This portrait merges two typologies that have been analyzed above. On the one hand, that of the Queen Consort, and on the other hand, that of seated Queen. And there's another one with a book, although the picture is not very good one. Maria Anna is still depicted standing, resting her right hand on the back of a chair. As in Munich, in both portraits, Maria Anna holds a book in her left hand, with the index finger marking the page where the Queen is reading, and it resembles the way Carreño represented her. A blue curtain closes the composition with the same colors and floral motifs as in the Munich portrait. These elements, the chair, the curtain, the Queen represented standing, are recurrent in the portraits of the women of the Catholic monarchy following the ceremony of the Court of Madrid. Before continuing, and to give you the context, we must keep in mind the long struggle of the European monarchies for the succession to the Catholic monarchy. Some historians have called this conflict that permeated all European politics of that time, 1648 to 1700, the diplomatic war of succession. Both Louis XIV and Emperor Leopold I claimed the monarchy because they were married. The first one with the half-sister Maria Theresa, and the second to the sister Marguerite, although both infantas had renounced to the rights of succession to the throne when they married, but the Catholic monarchy only recognized the renunciation of Maria Theresa, but never the renouncing of Margarita, heir of Charles II, until her death in 1673. Maria Anna dedicated the last years of her life to work for her lineage and to look for successors to Charles II, her son. Maria Anna's determination was that the succession to the Spanish throne should fall on a member of the descendants of her daughter Margarita, and that a French king should not succeed to the throne. Following the testament or the will of Philip IV, in which by clause 12, 13, and 53, he establishes the succession line, which says, in case of death of the male heir, his daughter, the Empress Margarita, would succeed him, who in the first bylaw of his will left as only heir to his daughter Mary Antonia, the one you can see here, and warned that it was followed the arranged thing in the testament of his father, Philip IV. Archduchess Mary Antonia married Maximilian Emmanuel, Elector of Baviera, and had a son, Joseph Ferdinand of Baviera, the one that you can see there, who was born in 1692. After the death of Maria Antonia, after the childbirth actually, Joseph Ferdinand would be the heir of his great-uncle Charles II. The Queen Mother Maria Anna of Austria had her hopes in her granddaughter first, and after her death in the child whom she said she carried in her heart for being the only thing left of my only daughter, the Infanta Empress Margarita. It was not until 1963 that this painting was attributed to Cuello. Previously, most critics believed it was by Carreño. Maria Anna looks much older in this painting. She must have been 50, around 50. The facial details are similar enough to other portraits by Carreño and by Cuello also. No specific documentation has been found on this painting, but it has been shown that Maria Anna acted as a painter's protector. In this new portrait, Maria Anna is seated on a chair holding a book on her left hand, as we've been insisting once and again. The other one on the armchair, near her a table, and on the table a spectacular round clock crowned by an imperial eagle. The composition is closed once again by a huge column and a blue and gold curtain that the painter places in a luxurious palace. Both the column and the double-headed eagle refer to the imperial theme of Charles V. This composition has several precedents, such as Titian's portrait of Philip II in the museum, in the Prado Museum that we saw yesterday. Also that of Maria, the Empress of Baidemoro, or those of Pantoja de la Cruz. Nevertheless, one of the closest paintings is this portrait by Antonio Arias Fernandez for the Salón Dorado, or that of the comedies of the Alcázar in 1639, where we have Charles V and Philip II. Coello places the queen in the same position as Philip II in Arias' portrait. Of course, Claudio Coello also has other portraits of Maria Anna for reference, such as the one of Mazo in 1666 that will be discussed by Patricia afterwards. And for the posture of the queen and those of Carreño that we have been mentioning earlier. This portrait could be read as the political patronage of Queen Mariana. The representation of her persona has been the same since she lost her husband Philip IV, dressed as a nun. The scenario in which a monarch is placed reflects the different activities that Mariana assumed during her widowhood: regent, guardian, queen mother consort, curator, virtuous queen. The new setting for this portrait by Claudio Coello reflects Mariana's work for the House of the Elector of Baviera. Maria Antonia, her granddaughter, following the etiquette and the form of representation of the Bavarian house. Court portraits cannot be understood without reference to the court system. If we compare the portraits of Maria Antonia and the Elector, we will see that in several of them, and these are just a few examples, they appear on the days under the canopy exactly as Mariana appears, and in a luxurious palace with a courtyard with columns also, in order to illustrate that the miniature by Ferdinand Carl Bruni, that I know thanks to the work of Rocío Martínez about Maria Antonia, that I have had the privilege to edit and publish. I'm almost done. The social interrelationship of the court, the objects that they surround themselves with, mark significances that facilitate the reading. The queen commissioned this portrait for her granddaughter and her husband, the Elector of Baviera. Claudio Coello uses for this portrait of Mariana iconographic formula which are mixed in order to convey the support message of the sovereign. As a conclusion, new formulas are created for Mariana's queen mother as they were created during the Regency. The court painters returned to earlier portraits to represent the new functions of the Queen Mariana, where all of those elements related to power disappear. And they emphasize the subordination of the queen to her son. There's a marked return to neutral spaces, while elements such as the queen's piety are emphasized. It was only when a new queen consort arrived at court, when Charles II married Mary Louise of Orleans, that new forms of representation of the Queen Mother were explored, and we will see the Queen's personal involvement in her portraits that are a reflection of her political patronage because of her lineage. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. Yo siempre quedo admirada de cuánto material.
Thank you very much for that. That was extremely interesting and a lot of information in just 15 minutes. I have to say, thank you very much for that. Yes, indeed. Very good then. Yes, please stay here. Now, apparently, we have a little bit of an issue with the PowerPoint for the next presentation. What we're going to do now is take questions and comments now while we iron out that wrinkle. So, if there are questions from the auditorium, questions via remote, I have some comments. Allow me to make some comments. I actually have questions too. I thought that this was an extremely interesting presentation. This idea that we can establish a relationship between the presentation of the queen, the actual appearance, apart from the symbols, right? The tapestry, the wall hangings. I'd like to ask the clock, the timepiece, does anybody have an idea as to why? I mean, is this an object of evident luxury? And also, could we establish a close relationship with the change in status of a queen, right? A woman in the court, in any court. It seemed to me that it was very interesting that you talked about these changes in the actual representation, and this, as we see the evolution from consort to regent to tutor to then exile, and then as a partisan, as a defender of one of the two sides. I thought that was very interesting, actually, that final portrait. And at the same time, you established a comparison. You talked about portraits of other women in the House of Austria and portraits of men. So I'm a little bit confused here. Up to what point are we seeing this reflection in the change of her status? Or is it something else? Are we seeing symbols being used, symbols which are well known, to, as it were, make her even more important? In other words, is this reflective of a change? Because she has a specific position, a specific status, we can see this in the garments, in the portraiture of these women, right? Well, let me answer. We're talking about garments. Well, not only garments, but yes, let's begin with the garments, with the clothes. This is Maria Anna. She is wearing a nun's habit as of the moment her husband dies. Now, this is a tradition. On the one hand, this is a tradition of women of the Spanish monarchy. Yes, in broader terms, this is important. I mean, we're just seeing Empress Maria, but you're showing your loyalty, your faithfulness to your husband, of course. And, you have Joanna of Portugal, you have Empress Maria. Who else? Let me see. I'm thinking Catherine. No, Catherine of Austria wears black. That she does, but she is not wearing a nun's habit. That's going to depend on the court a little bit. So I think it's a way of actually expressing the fact that she is the widow of Philip IV at a very difficult point in time, because this is when the regency actually begins. And it's also a way of actually expressing clearly that she is the mother of the king. It's an odd way of saying it, but she is saying it. So I don't know. I don't know what else I could add. I mean, I could talk about the meaning of white, the meaning of black, of her wimple, because it's part of the habit that the nuns would wear, the novitiates, it a lot, but I'm not sure whether this is the time. No, but this is something that I found interesting after hearing yesterday's comments. When we hear about the portraiture of these women, there were comments as to whether they were wearing the Spanish dress or the French dress. This is a woman who is a widow. That leeway doesn't exist, you see. So what I'm interested in, and this is something I'm throwing out here to our audience, I'm looking forward to comments because there might be other examples. I just wonder whether we should perhaps think about these portraits and understand that they are a faithful rendering of how these women actually dressed, the clothes they wore, because before they were widows, they wore different garments in the fashion of this, in the fashion of that, for political purposes, right? I mean, they would I know a little bit more about the 16th century. Isabella of Valois, if she was going to receive a French ambassador, she would wear the French outfit. If it was an Italian ambassador, she would wear the Italian dress. If she had to go to a luncheon with a Castilian nobleman, she would wear the Castilian court dress. So that was a change. No, in the case of Mariana, I think that as of the moment when she becomes a widow, there's not much change. The wimples change, the shape of the wimple, and sometimes it might seem that it has more to do with the nuns proper than with the official widow's dress. As of a given point in time, at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and actually, I have found references to the fact that Mariana actually joined a religious order, but it's just one document, so I don't really dare say anything. But it is true that at that point in time, another change takes place in her wimple. The rest of her garment is the same, but her wimple, which has been studied, does change. So this coincides with when some academics, I mean, the wimple or the headdress is also related to different traditions. So would anyone like to add anything? Would anyone like to address the issue of garments? Hello. Yes.
No,
This, I wanted to ask, I'm a little bit confused. We're talking here about widow's weeds, we're talking about the garment, and we're saying monjil, or in the manner of the nuns? No, I'm sorry, no, it's a term, it's the same. The widow's dress is called monjil, nun's garment. It's the same. It is the clothes that a widow would wear. So in the case of Joanna, it's different. Margaret of Austria, Mary of Hungary, they wear different headdresses or wimples. So I would like to ask, this tradition perhaps of appropriating that nun's habit, do you know when it dates to? Yes. Oh, yes. Using nun's habit. Well, the texts, the treaties that I have found date back to the 16th century, and they talk about how actually it stems from the garment that a novice would wear. And that habit, they're not nuns, you see, it's a novice, it's not a full-fledged nun. They have as yet not married into the church, they are not living the conventual life. So that habit, when what I've read, and what I have read, which is not to say that there's not more, that dates back to the 16th century. And this is what they actually say. Thank you. Now, if you were to say, if you send me an email afterwards, I'll be very happy to send you the references, because I really didn't think anybody was going to ask about this habit. I'm something, but it slipped my mind. But yes, I'll be happy to send that. Okay, very good. And Ezequiel wants to say something. Oh, sorry, no, but I'm sorry, I have to juggle this, unless it's something which has to do specifically. Yes, well, thank you then. Go ahead. Microphone, please. Thank you. And good morning. Let me begin by saying thank you to Mercedes, because this was part of Maria Anna of Austria's life that we're not really familiar with. We talk about the regency, but her widowhood as Queen Mother, 1680, the first 6 years of the 1690s, well, there does seem to be a little bit of an empty space there, so thank you very much for that. And I did want to ask you, we're talking about the widow's habit, the famous monjil. Oh, poor you, says the moderator. I'm going to do my best, says the speaker. Okay, now my question is, we've seen that members of the royal family and noble women are like mirrors, you see. So noble women are always imitating the behavior. Oh, wait, yes. everything that they see the women of the royal household doing. So I wanted to ask you, Mercedes, have you seen portraits of noble women who are widows who also wear the widow's habit? Yes, my answer is yes, of course. Actually, one of the portraits that we saw, I don't have the PowerPoint, I'm sorry, I was going to share. It's Infanta Marguerite in mourning. In the background, the Queen Mother. I'm not sure whether, no, Maria Anna of Austria by Masso from 66. In the background, we see that shape in that hall, eight-sided room with Charles and children. Now, the person holding the reins, because it's an infant, the king can't walk, you see, it's his aya, his nanny. She was a widow and she's wearing the monjil. She's wearing the widow's habit. I'm going to say the word in Spanish, monjil, says the speaker. So yes, she's wearing the widow's habit. And other portraits that come to mind are Balthazar Charles on horseback. I think someone showed it yesterday. I'm not really sure. And yes, we do see the Queen. Not. Let's see. Not. Oh my goodness! I can't remember the name of the collection in London. It doesn't matter. There's two copies. So in one, you see Queen Isabella with a group of women. Now, one of these women, one or two of these ladies are wearing widow's habit, monjil, as well. So let's see. I'd have to really look back in time. But yes, there are. I don't remember any lady portrayed, a noble woman portrayed in the widow's habit, in the monjil. That I cannot remember, but it well may be. Thank you, Ezequiel. Okay, another one of the questions that just came from the people following us online, our guests online. The question is, are there portraits, are there engravings of Maria Anna of Austria as a widow that would underscore her virtues as pious widow and regent, but by means of inscriptions and other iconographic motifs? Well, yesterday, for instance, Álvaro Pascual Chanel did share a number of engravings of Marianne, and we do see her in some with Charles II and Mary Louise of Orleans, and one is Our Lady of the Almudena, with Our Lady of Almudena in one, and in another alone, in an oval also. So yes, there are, but so for instance, yesterday also we saw one. They are seated. Alvaro deals with them. It's the double portraits of Charles II and Marianne, and we see also, yes, it's as a medallion, but they appear, the two of them, Charles II and Marianne of Austria. I'm not sure whether I'm losing everybody with all of these explanations without any pictorial background, but the Catholic king and queen on the other side. I don't know whether you remember. I mean, I remember it because that's something I've seen very often. But on the one hand, it is an engraving. On the one hand, you have Charles II as a child and his mother wearing the widow's habit. Both of them are seated. Now, women in a seated position doesn't happen frequently. It happens more frequently in the 16th century. But this is when etiquette is closed, if you will. Etiquette lands, and this is at the end of the 16th century. And eventually, with Philip IV himself, the different reforms, I know that you're an expert in this, in the different queens' households. So that seated representation is very infrequent. For the most part, women are portrayed standing. So after the Regency, Queen Mariana is seated because there is an allusion made to power, and that's what we're going to hear Patricia address. Very good. Well, thank you. I think that this is good for the question and answers. Mercedes, thank you very much indeed for your contributions and your thoughts. So now, I think that we will continue our debate afterwards, but now we are going to hear. Now, as I say, we are going to hear from our colleague. Hopefully everything will be up and running, but we're talking about the same queen. So I think that we can just take it for granted that this is what we are talking about. So without further ado, I give the floor to Patricia Manzano, who will talk the construction of the image of Maria Anna of Austria. So thank you very much, and I apologize for these technical glitches. Thank you.
I apologize for the difficulties that we had with my presentation. She is working at Durham University presently, and we would like to congratulate her because she just presented her PhD. She just got her PhD degree. Thank you, Mia. I'd like to start by obviously thanking Professor Noelia García Pérez for inviting me. I hope that she doesn't revoke me for the future. I'd like to thank the museum, Paloma Málaga, and all of the technical team that has been able to solve these issues. Eventually, I need to do the presentation from the stand here, but anyway, the most emblematic image of Maria Anna of Austria has survived to the present day, is that of Queen Mother as a regent and a widow, and this is an image that is due to an artist considered a minor artist today, but very successful in his time. This artist is John Bautista Martinez del Mazo, who in the 17th century enjoyed fame and fortune thanks to the close relationship he maintained with his father-in-law and master Diego Velázquez, a painter who is probably more familiar to you than Mazo himself. To understand how we arrived to this portrait of Maria Anna and Mazo's role in shaping the Queen's image of power since her arrival in Madrid, we will go back to his first portraits at court. Some of them we've been seeing these days. As we heard, Maria Anna arrived at the Madrid court at the end of 1649. Initially, she was to marry the heir to the throne, Prince Baltasar Carlos, but after the premature death of the prince and the death of Queen Elizabeth of Bourbon, the marriage was arranged between Maria Anna and her uncle Philip IV to strengthen diplomatic relations between the two houses of Habsburg. Both the trip and the wedding were immortalized in the frescoes of the Royal Palace of Naples on the screen. And although it is true that we cannot speak of the monarch as a patron of the arts on the level of the other great queens, but he was a theatre enthusiast and was involved in the reconstruction of the El Escorial after the Great Fire of 1671. We heard several examples of her patronage yesterday. In any case, what interests us today are the official portraits and who painted them, and how her image of power was configured. That is how Maria Anna, the new queen, was represented. It would have been normal for Diego Velázquez, the king's painter, to have been in charge of producing the first portraits of the queen upon her arrival in Spain. However, when the queen arrived at court, the painter Velázquez was not in Madrid. He actually was in Italy. Actually, Velázquez left for Genoa with the delegation in charge of collecting the new queen in Milano. But their paths diverged, and Velázquez did not have the opportunity to portray Maria Anna abroad. Therefore, possibly the first painter to depict the effigy of the new queen was Juan Bautista Martinez del Mazo, son-in-law and disciple of Velázquez and artistic successor of the master in every way. For those of you who do not know the biography of Mazo, I'm going to provide you a few details. The painter, whom we see with his back to the screen, was born around 1612, possibly in the province of Cuenca. The first documentary record we have of Mazo is that of his marriage to Velázquez's daughter in 1633. And from that point on, Mazo made a career at court as painter and civil servant, progressively inheriting some of the father-in-law's titles. models. Today, Mazo is known mainly for his career as a copyist of the great masters of the royal collection and for being the one who best assimilated the technique and style of Velázquez to such an extent that even today there are still problems of attribution between the two painters. It is estimated that one of the first portraits of Maria Anna at court was this one of Maria Anna in a red dress, which is in the Consistoriches Museum in Vienna. This portrait was sent to Vienna for Maria Anna's father, Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand III. And if you notice, it is a different representation of the Queen than the ones we're used to seeing, with this bright red dress that looks half finished and contrasts with the much more meticulous finish of the Queen's face. Previously, the image of Maria Anna was only known through the portraits produced in Vienna by Franz Luix, such as this one sent to Madrid as a betrothal portrait, which is said to have been manipulated to make Maria Anna look older, taller, and in other words, more suitable to beget a heir, which, let us not forget, would be the main role of the new queen. In this first portrait, several resources are used to present Maria Anna as the ideal candidate for the Hispanic throne. As we see, she is richly dressed and bejeweled, with her hair loose, which was seen also as a symbol of fertility, and it is known that Luix's portrait was hanging in Philip IV's chambers, and the manipulation of the Queen's image was so evident that when she arrived at the court, it was surprising how little resemblance there was between the portrait and the sitter, because certainly the work of art did not do her justice. It is a similar situation to Holbein's famous portrait of Anna the Cleverest for Henry VIII, only in this time Maria Anna is favored. Another possible model for the model of the portrait of Maria Anna in a red dress is this one we see on the screen currently in this Francesco Castle in Milano and erroneously labeled as Anonymous Spanish. As you can see, this is a model close to the Velázquez portrait with the same attributes. Although the execution of the portraits is very different, elements of continuity are maintained, such as the table, fan, curtain, and in two of the cases, the opening that opens to the garden. In this portrait by Velázquez, we see the serious face of the Queen, and this will not change in future portraits of Maria Anna, although the serious image of the official portraits does not necessarily agree with reality, since in the chronicles of the time, it is said that the Queen enjoyed so much the theater entertainment that she was actually criticized because she laughed too much at events. Speaking of events, one of the most interesting elements of Mazo's biography is precisely related to Queen Maria Anna and the Madrid Festival. This event is recorded by the treatise writer and friend of Velázquez, Lázaro Díaz del Valle, in his unpublished manuscript, Origin and Illustration of the Noble Art of Painting and Drawing, from which Antonio Palomino would borrow many of the lives of artists that he would later publish. In the biography that Díaz del Valle dedicates to Mazo, the painter's work as portraitist of the Queen is reviewed. Mazo, first as a court painter and then as a chamber painter, portrayed all of the members of the royal family. So it is striking that the portraits of Maria Anna stand out among the artist's extensive production. The biography details also that for the Corpus Christi Festival 1650, a portrait of Maria Anna by Mazo was exhibited in the port of Guadalajara, close to the Plaza Mayor, one of the most used public places of exhibition in the court. The portrait is described as so natural that it caused admiration to all, both for being one of the first seen of Her Majesty in this court and for being a marvel of the brush. So in effect, Mazo is one of the first, if not the first, to capture the image of Maria Anna as a queen in Madrid. In the same passage of this biography, it is also related that the portrait is exhibited with such great success that it increased the good opinion that people had of Maria Anna, and this is emphasized by Díaz del Valle, because in an era where the portrait had a strong symbolic charge, The representations of the kings and queens were fundamental to bring the monarchy closer to the people. Is it possible that this portrait mentioned by Díaz del Valle was the same one we have seen with the queen in red dress? We don't know for sure. Some historians theorize the fact that the portrait on display at Puerta de Guadalajara, of which we have no further news, could be one of the copies of the official portrait of Maria Anna after Velázquez's return, which is also the image of the symposium, by the way. The original Velázquez model that we can see on the screen is here at the Prado, and there are many versions, some attributed to Mazo, which tells us of the popularity of the composition. Both the model and the copies are dated around 1652 or 1653, in any case after the birth of Infanta Margarita, and therefore none of these works can be the one that was publicly exhibited on the feast of Corpus Christi about 2 years earlier. Maria Anna's image will be widely disseminated through copies of royal portraits based on Velázquez's models, many, but the most interesting portraits, in my opinion, are executed after the death of the king and Velázquez. And as you can see, the change is drastic. Philip IV died in 1665, and in his will, it is established the regency of Maria Anna since Charles II was only 4 years old when his father died. From this moment on, numerous portraits will emerge to satisfy the needs of the new Spanish political framework. But the calm exterior that we're going to see in the Queen's portraits does not correspond to the political instability of the time. 3 days before Philip IV's death, he left Maria Anna in charge of all the territories of the monarchy and created a board of government that would help Maria Anna in matters of state during her 10 years as a regent. But Maria Anna as a governor had two main problems that we discussed yesterday. To begin with, her confidence in the Austrian Jesuit Juan Eduardo Nizar did not win her any favor. In addition, Joseph of Austria, a legitimate son of Philip IV, rallied aristocrats to his cause to counterbalance his stepmother's power. Politically, this was a convulsive period for the Hispanic monarchy, and it has traditionally been accepted that Maria Anna was not up to her role as head of state, although recently several studies have come out on Maria Anna's political authority, which contradict Maria Anna's reputation as a bad governor. In Sylvia Mitchell's latest book, actually, it is estimated that Maria Anna was already exercising state functions even before Philip IV died. Court painters, especially Mazo, who, since the death of Velázquez in 1660, held the position of chamber painter, will promote a new image of the queen as regent, mother, widow. And as you can imagine, this was not an easy task. The first of these paintings, where the new image of Maria Anna's power is configured, was painted by Mazo in 1666. We're going to dwell on this portrait because it is extremely interesting. But I should also mention, as Mercedes mentioned, that there are 3 other versions considered autographs in the Museum of the Greco in Toledo, another one in a private collection in Madrid, and another one in the Arte Museum in Puerto Rico. The London version is considered the earliest one because of the changes in the composition that can be seen in the technical study. Maria Anna looks towards the viewer. We've talked about the dress, but she's not worn as a nun, she's not dressed as a nun, but rather she's wearing the traditional dress of high-born widows. She's seated and in a 3/4 pose. And we are presented with the queen working on the hall of mirrors of the old Alcázar of Madrid. The representation of seated queens is unusual but not unheard of in the Habsburg imaginary. In this case, the throne-like chair is a symbol of power and a reminder of the status and duties of the sitter, who, like Philip IV, would preside over the Council of State seated. Maria Anna holds in her right hand a small white paper, a cartelino with the title of Señora, the name of the artist, Juan Bautista del Mazo, and the date of the portrait, 1666. It is one of the three paintings signed by Mazo throughout his career, and of the series, only this one and the version of the Museum of Greco remain signed, although the Madrileñan version may also be signed, although it was deleted in the 20th century to falsify Velázquez's signature so that it got more value as a painting. The only thing that identifies the sitter as the Queen Regent is the inscription included to balance the composition in the foreground, which reads in yellow capital letter, "The Queen, Our Lady, Doña Maria Anna of Austria, mother of King Charles II, who enjoys God." This is a portrait with a great symbolic chart. The dog is an allegorical representation of fidelity. And if you look at the vertical axis, the Queen's hand is prominently placed where the only jewel that Maria Anna wears stands out, her wedding ring, which at the same time invokes the presence of her deceased husband. The curtain framing the Queen separates the portrait of Maria Anna in the foreground from a second scene in the background. This part of the painting is set in another chamber of the Alcázar, the octagonal or ochavada room, which is recognizable by the architecture and the bronze sculpture of a Greco-Roman goddess whose head is hidden by the cloth. This sculpture belongs to the series of the 7 planets by Jacques Chongling, including the ochavada room, as a reference to the epithets of Philip IV. Today, that king is better known as the planet king, but Philip IV used to be known as the sun king even before Louis XIV. Out of the 7 bronze figures, the one depicted in this painting is the personification of the moon, which is married to the sun. The moon shines brightest when the sun is absent. Mazo used the ochavada sala of the Alcázar to frame a scene of an almost domestic character. This one, which you can see through a doorway, is accentuated by the regular checkered floor that slopes to the left and the diagonal formed by the dog at Maria Anna's feet and the cartelino in the Queen's right hand. In the scene, a 5-year-old Charles II appears with his toy carriage and an entourage of 3 ladies in waiting and 2 dwarfs, all members of the Queen's household, and apparently oblivious to Maria Anna's presence in the foreground. Mazo had already used this composition in the background of the portrait of Margaret of Austria, which also depicts Maria Anna's daughter dressed in mourning after the death of Philip IV, her father. This portrait is earlier than Maria Anna's, but we can also see the young Charles II accompanied by his entourage. Here, with the emblem of the Order of the Golden Fleece and the baton of command that marks him as Captain General of the Army. Mazo, in this latest stage of his career, will create absolutely referential paintings that could be read as a continuous homage to his father-in-law and as a constant attempt of legitimization. What is more, the most interesting thing about this fragment of Maria Anna's portrait is that the ladies offered the king a vase of water, a direct reference to Las Meninas, where one of the Meninas is offering Margarina precisely a vase of flowers. If we understand Las Meninas as a family portrait, what we're presented here, therefore, is Charles II as the direct heir of Philip IV and successor of the Hispanic monarchy, establishing a direct connection with Velázquez's masterpiece. This maybe could help us understand better the function of works such as the controversial copy of Las Meninas at Kingston Lacy. There's been much speculation as to whether the copy, which is much smaller than the original, could have been a modeletto or a recorder, or whether the author was Mazo or Velázquez himself. In no case could this work be a sketch for the painting we have here at the Prado, because we know from technical studies that Velázquez modified the position of some figures, including his self-portrait, so this can only be a later copy. Some historians suggest that Mazo painted the work we have on the screen for himself. And I see this as a study that Mazo made of Las Melinas with the intention of understanding and assimilating a composition that Mazo would later version in portraits of, such as those of Maria Anna and Margarita. Mazo, as I've already said, was the first to mold the image, official image of Maria Anna when she got to the court. Clearly, the portrait with the greatest impact was this one during the Regency, or to put it in terms of the visual poetry used in this painting, the portrait that is done when the moon is shining because the sun is no longer there. After the death of Philip IV, representations of Maria Anna proliferated, and this portrait became a very popular model at the time of that Mazo and other artists versioned once and again. Through the symbolic resources such as the dog, the ring, Charles II, Mazo constructed a new image of power of Maria Anna of Austria as a grieving widow, a devoted mother, a regent worthy of her position. Paradoxically, the copyist artist became copied artist, although no doubt the iconography of Maria Anna as Queen Regent evolved according to the needs of the Hispanic monarchy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. And we had changed the format a little bit, so I think that we now are ready to continue, right? And I think, spoken long enough, so I'm going to ask our audience now, our audience here with us, our online audience as well. I ask whether you have questions or comments for Patricia. I thought that this was a very interesting address and a very detailed assessment of a fascinating work. If you can please bring the microphone here.
¿Hola? No está funcionando. Ahora sí. Hola, buenas.
Hello, thank you. Let me begin by saying thank you so very much to our two speakers. They have really spoken beautifully. And I don't really have a question. I would like to hold a conversation here. I'd like to know whether you agree with me or not. You showed images of Marianne in that portrait as governor by Jean Bautista Martinez del Mazo, and we heard about 4. The Madrid one from the Granados collection, I don't think it's by Martinez de Mazo, frankly. I think it's Cráneo de Miranda. Yes, there are traits of the Queen, in her portrayal. They're very, very different. The brushstrokes themselves, this is a work that I have seen myself with my own eyes. I know that the family has always wanted this work to be deemed to be a Mazo, but it seems to me that the brushstroke, that face, which is so very different from other portraits, I think that it's more of a Carreño. So I just wanted to ask your opinion. I wanted to know what your thoughts are about this. I wanted to know what you think. Well, thank you. I haven't talked about attributions because that's very complicated. Of the 4 existing works, 3 have been studied closely, except the London one. I would have doubts regarding the Puerto Rico one, but the Puerto Rico is the one I have not seen myself. So we need to be very, very cautious. As to the attribution of the private collection in Madrid, I know that the work was restored recently, and it would be wonderful, I think, if we were allowed to study it a little bit more in depth. I think that Professor Chanel would agree with that attribution to Mazo. Yes. Yes, in the catalogs, absolutely. In the catalogs that have been written for the collection, he attributes the work to Mazo. But when you actually place them one beside the other, well, the image that you showed, those 4 portraits, I think that we can really understand that there is a great difference. Not only how the the pleats are placed, but the physical representation of the queen, which is related to other portraits by Carreño, but that knows those traits which are rounder, all of them, of Mazzo's, that changes, and you have a more severe aspect with more clearly defined traits, and that would be Carreño. So that's what I meant. So it was more not really a question, but a thought. Yes, I have to agree with you, Gloria. From my point of view, it's more similar. Not only the queen's face, but also her figure is more similar to other portraits by Carreño. But I mean, who knows? Everybody has their opinion.
Thank you very much. I first of all like to congratulate Patricia Manzano. I loved your presentation. The reading of Kingston Lacy's Meninas I find very convincing. Actually, the references that you can see from the gesture is not just by chance. Obviously, there's a political reading, as you expressed rightly. Everything we expect from your PhD thesis is that you include the attributions, and if you don't do that, you will be wrong. I'm talking about what Gloria Martinez Leiva mentioned. I totally agree with her. The painting of Granados collection, I'm convinced it is Carreño. I disagree with the study made by Professor Chenele in the catalogue of Granados collection, and I'm telling you to encourage you to go and see that the works of Granados collection are at the access of the researchers, because José Manuel is very, very kind, and he really shows the researchers whatever. I am really looking forward to see your PhD thesis dissertation. I love the reading of Kingston Lacy's Meninas, and I hope that you understand and you explain about what we need to see from this young generation. Thank you, thank you.
Rápidamente, bueno, gracias Benito por el comentario. En la tesis sí que me meto en el tema de atribuciones.
Thank you, Benito. Yes, I do talk about attributions in my PhD dissertation, and the one that you mentioned I have already seen, but attributions is a topic that would take us 2 days, so I thought that since we had people from the audience at large, I have decided not to talk about attributions, and I've just brought the versions of the painting of London that have traditionally been attributed to Mazzo. In my PhD dissertation, the attribution issue is one that I analyze at length. Oh yes, that's what we need to do, explain it at length. Obviously, the attributions is very interesting, but yes, for the public at large, maybe you or other participants could add something else about the concept of an official portrait. Why is it that as they join the court, they have portraits made officially? Who are those portraits for? Maybe that sounds very basic, but there's a lot of people who is not familiarized with that type of portrait. Why do we need an official portrait? Why is it that there's so many copies of the portraits themselves? Could you please why don't you talk to the audience? Mercedes was suggesting to me that this is something that was discussed yesterday. Official portraits are needed because these paintings from the royal collection were not accessible for a general audience. That is why it was so important for them to be exhibited in public events such as the Corpus Christi for people. The monarchy had a divinity function. Basically, the king was a mysterious figure for people at large. And these portraits were needed precisely to get the monarchy closer to the people so that the people got to know them. And yesterday they talked about the exchange of official portraits amongst the different courts because they were relatives, but also because as they offered them as diplomatic gifts or to prove the power in certain territories. Actually, it is said that a portrait could replace the king if the king were not present, a portrait of Philip IV. That is why portraits are very important. It is important to have an official image and a standardized one that is approved by the monarchy itself. It is sort of like a simulation, a simulacrum. In front of a portrait of a king, you behave as if the king were in front of you. It is very important to have that image. Ezequiel was talking about that yesterday. There's a more formal image, and that more formal image is the one that is really sent to the courts. And it is posted on the official places of the monarchy, palaces and in the courts, in the different buildings of the different kingdoms. And the nobles also develop their own gallery of portraits. The king also develops his own gallery of portraits, sometimes with a function which is trying to be close. Yesterday, he was talking about ancestors, not as ancestors in other cultures, but sort of like a memoir of the family's actions. Also as a memory to imitate the family's actions. For instance, in the Mirrors Hall, the portrait of Charles V is there, symbolic portraits of the masculine, in this case, part of the Habsburgs. It is a way so that the members of the family who see those portraits know how to act, to emulate them. So it's a memory, a reminder about how they need to behave. Actually, they learn, children. For children, it is also very important. Another question here. Congratulations to the two of you. My question has to do with attributions, but as compared to Gloria, I am not an expert. I'm just curious. It caught my attention that the portrait of Maria Anna in a red dress, you attributed it to a different hand. Yes, Velázquez workshop, I said. And I was looking it up just by curiosity, and I saw that the consistorius is also attributed to Velázquez directly. Could you please tell us more about that attribution? If I'm not wrong, the museum attributes it to the workshop of Velázquez, not to Velázquez. Yes, it has always been accepted as coming from the workshop of Velázquez. Some time ago it was attributed to Velázquez, but we need to think that 90% of the workshop paintings have at some point in time been attributed to Velázquez, but that has been revised with time. The official attribution has to do with the workshop. Although I attribute it to Mazo, I have had many conversations with the curator of the museum who agrees with me, but changing the attribution in a museum is relatively complicated and it takes a long time in general terms. So to me, that painting belongs to Mazo. I don't know, Mercedes, if you agree with me. Right now, I attribute it to Velázquez's workshop, and if Patricia says it's by Mazo, I agree with her.
Bueno, yo creo que con eso no se puede superar este pacto.
There's nothing better than that.
Vale, pues...
This was an agreement. Thank you. That's the best way to close this round table. Thank you so much to the two speakers for their presentations. And now we're going to have a coffee break until 11:30, a 30-minute coffee break. Thank you.